Well, Osio, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to give it another minute to let folks log in, but appreciate you being here today. This is our Tribal Stewardship Policy webinar focused in around cultural burn agreements under the new law, Senate Bill 310. So appreciate you all spending your afternoon with us, and we'll get started shortly. All right. Well, it looks like we have a good number of folks joined in. So again, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. My name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she, her pronouns, and very honored to serve as the Deputy Secretary for Tribal Affairs here at the California Natural Resources Agency, and very excited for today's webinar where we can explore more about the importance of cultural fire and the new law, Senate Bill 310, and how that law is a powerful tool in the toolbox to advance cultural fire as a cultural and wildfire resiliency tool. So thank you again for being here today. Excited to have the conversation with you all. Um, Chairman Buster Atterbury from the Karuk tribe is not able to join us after all today. Fingers crossed he will be able a little bit later this hour. So with that, I will hand it off to Secretary Wade Crowfoot, who's going to be providing some opening and welcoming remarks for today's webinar. Secretary, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks, Geneva, for enabling me to help frame up our conversation today. And thanks for the over 400 people from across the state that are joining us. This discussion here today is really reflecting on a major milestone that, thanks to our tribal leaders and our governmental leaders and state government, that we're able to achieve. And that is, of course, these cultural burn agreements that we'll talk about today. I want to first of all thank the Karuk tribe and its tribal leadership, Chairman Atterbury, the council, folks like Bill Tripp, who will be on today, for their leadership. We wouldn't be here today talking about this new framework for cultural burning across the state if it hadn't been for their vision and persistence. Also, huge thanks to Senator Bill Dodd, who carried this legislation to establish this legal framework, and his team over years, remaining focused on getting this legal framework in place. And then I want to personally thank the Director and Chief of CAL FIRE, Joe Tyler, who has made this a personal priority to implement the legislation as quickly and as fully as we know we can. So we're here today because we, as state government agencies, now know what California Native American tribes have known for thousands of years, which is managed fire benefits the health of landscapes across much of what we now know as California. It's a remarkable journey in that we represent agencies that actually outlawed the practices of cultural fire and prescribed fire that now we're working to expand across the landscape. And it's truly a journey. It's a journey that we have progressed in because we've learned from our tribal partners who we'll hear from today. This journey for me and in my job began with the governor's apology to tribal leaders on behalf of the state of California, unconditional official apology. Something that no other governor has done for what has been a state-sanctioned policy of genocide that founded our republic 175 years ago. That was followed by decades of land dispossession, discrimination, and disconnection. And that was an important moment, powerful in its symbolism, powerful in its clarity, but it really was just the first step in what the Newsom administration has been progressing on in the last several years. This includes actually shifting the paradigm so that we're managing our lands and our environment with the guidance and leadership of California Native American tribes. This has included ancestral tribal land, ancestral land return or land back, I'm proud that our state government has invested in over $107 million to help repatriate over 30,000 acres of land back to California Native American tribes. It also translates into expanded tribal access and co-stewardship. I'm proud that our state park system, over 1.6 million acres, now over half of that land is governed by such agreements between state parks and tribes that have these lands as their homelands. And then importantly, third sort of leg of the stool at which we're driving forward is building in and learning from traditional ecological knowledge and really trying to learn from that knowledge, that wisdom, those environmental practices as we take care of California lands. And that really brings us to where we're at with cultural fire. We know now that California was managed for thousands of years with cultural fire. And that's critically important to us now because it's enables the health of the landscapes and to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires. But for too long, these tribal practices, these traditional practices were actually against state law. And then once they were in essence decriminalized, it remained very, very difficult for tribal practitioners to practice cultural fire up until this day. So Senate Bill 310, in my mind, was all about recognizing tribal leadership, tribal sovereignty, tribal practice, and establishing a legal framework so that a tribe and our agency, that includes CAL FIRE, can establish these broad cultural fire burning agreements that enable tribes to actually get the good fire back onto the landscape that our lands so desperately need. So I'm just thankful. I'm excited to be part of this journey. I'm really optimistic about what this agreement between Karuk government and state government will actually yield in the Klamath River Basin. And I'm really excited about it as a potential model for agreements between governments, tribal governments, state governments in different parts of the state. So Geneva, big thanks for letting me share my thoughts and my strong commitment to ensure that we continue to drive forward on cultural fire and supporting tribal leaders exercising cultural fire that advances tribal sovereignty and beneficial land stewardship.
Well, Lotto, and thank you so much, Secretary. Really appreciate it and your leadership in this space and really thinking through how the agency in partnership with CAL FIRE, Cal EPA, CARB, and so many others can really reflect on our role in the beneficial and the cultural fire space and how we can serve to be better partners with tribes in that spirit of truth and healing. So just thank you so much. And thank you so much for opening us up today. So I really appreciate everyone who's joining us, and thank you for being here. As you can already tell, we are putting information in the chat feature, which hopefully is helpful to provide additional background and resources to you all as you are learning and connecting on this important work that we're doing in partnership with the Karuk tribe and so many other California Native American tribes across the state. So please feel free, check out that chat. We're going to keep putting more information in there for you. As we go on through today's webinar, if you have any questions that you have, please use the Q&A feature that you'll see in the bottom of the screen. And someone joining us here in the webinar on our panel will work to answer those questions in that Q&A feature. So please use that feature and we'll follow up with you on answers if it's not now, sometime later. So hopefully that Q&A feature is a helpful resource for you. So for the rest of the webinar, my hope is to provide a very quick overview on those historical wrongs that the Secretary mentioned, as well as Senate Bill 310, but then reserve the most of the time today for our esteemed panelists who have been doing a lot of work and thinking about this space, thinking about how each government that they represent can advance cultural fire and build strong, meaningful partnerships with tribes. So very excited to get to our panelists. But before then, wanted to set the table so we're all operating from the same information. And so James, if you don't mind pulling up the PowerPoint presentation. And if you can change the next slide, please. So when we're thinking about historical wrongs, I think it's always important to contextualize it and where we are in history and what it looked like before California was established as a state. So as the secretary mentioned, tribes since time immemorial have been stewarding the lands that we now know as California. And part of that stewardship is the application of cultural fire. Cultural fire was and still is a tool that tribes use to manage their natural resources, their forests, and also intertwined with significant cultural practices that are critical for the health and well-being of California Native Americans and their communities and their governments. And so this happened continues to happen throughout the whole history of California. But we see disruptions, we see the criminalization of cultural fire, the criminalization of these cultural practices come around through different waves of colonization. And so you have the Russians from the north, you have Spain from the south, that then turns into the Mexican government from the south. And then we have the Treaty of Guadalupe, or then we have the Mexican-American War that was ended through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on March 10th, 1848. And then this is the moment where you see the United States actively playing a colonial role in the history of California and that disruption of tribal stewardship and care of the land and natural resources, and many California Native Americans being harmed through this active colonization of the state of California. You also see the gold rush beginning right around the end of this Mexican-American War in 1848. And then in September 9th, 1850, California joins the nation as the 31st state of the United States. And so this is the first time that the state of California, as formed as a new government, is now in the role of governing the lands of what we now know as California and having a role in those historical wrongs against California Native American tribes, and particularly cultural fire. If we could get the next slide, please. So the one law that I would like to just highlight, really kind of showing this criminalization, this outlawing of cultural fire, is the 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians. And this law allowed for many different historical wrongs against Native Americans and their governments. And you can see a quick little snippet there, but I bolded and underlined particularly the setting fire to the prairies. And this is one of the first, if not the first law that we see on the books that criminalize and outlaw the use of cultural fire against California Native American tribes. This is the law that also allowed for the indigitude of California Native American children, vagrancy, and was also used as a facilitation of removing tribes from their ancestral lands. I provided two resources at the bottom of this slide in case folks are wanting to do a deeper dive and learn more about the history of our state, and then the particular research around this particular 1850s law. And so that's the context, that's the historical context that we're operating under. And these are the historical wrongs that the secretary was mentioning of the criminalization of cultural practices. And so now that we have the governor's apology and policy across the state to do that deep dive into that historical record and identifying tangible solutions towards healing, we're so excited to have this webinar and this conversation with you all and exploring how Senate Bill 310 is a tool in that toolbox to address those historical wrongs and move forward in healing. So if we can get the next slide, please. And so you'll see Senate Bill 310, authored by Dodd, but also sponsored by the Karuk Tribe. Again, Wado and thank you to the Karuk Tribe and your leadership in this space. It sets out to do a variety of different things. I recommend you take a look at the actual law and seeing all the components of this new law. But two clauses I really want to highlight to help set the conversation today. The first is the legislature acknowledging and understanding that the federally recognized tribes have inherent sovereignty and authority to regulate their members and their cultural practices. And this is getting to the root of understanding that federally recognized tribes have inherent sovereignty and authority to um, govern their people, to govern their land, and to govern their culture. And this law acknowledges that at the beginning point of it. And so that is an important kind of framing and understanding of what we're trying to do here in the spirit of truth and healing is to understand and respect that inherent sovereignty that tribes have for their cultural practices, plus many other things. And then the next clause here is the legislature also finding declaring that cultural fire is a critical tool to advance our fuels management and wildfire resiliency goals across the state. We need cultural fire. We as Californians as a whole need cultural fire. And that cultural fire is a critical component for us to build resilient landscapes in a changing climate and to meet the time that we're in today. And then you also have SB 310 authorizing the California Natural Resources Agency and local air districts to enter into agreements with federally recognized tribes for cultural burning. And these agreements stand in lieu of CAL FIRE and air district permitting, but still create a system and collaborative relationship between the state and tribes in not only respecting tribal sovereignty and having more cultural fire applied to the landscape, but also benefiting or ensuring public benefit and health and well-being as well. So very excited to get into the weeds in here, and I'm so glad that we have Director Bill Tripp, who's joining us, who can share a little bit more about how the Creek Tribe is thinking through these agreements. This bill also then allows these agreements to play a role as certain burn plan approvals and permit requirements for the prescribed fire claims fund pilot. And so this is a helpful resource to ensure that we can get more prescribed beneficial cultural fire on the landscape. And then lastly, something to note is that this law still and clearly articulates that all burning must have landowner permission. And so the tribe, the Krug tribe joining us today, as well as all other burners, know and appreciate and work so collaboratively with landowners for all burning on those lands. So that is a very quick overview of Senate Bill 310. I'm so glad that we have our esteemed panelists joining us here today. Please add, correct anything in my presentation, but excited to get into the conversation with you all. And so first for our panel discussion is Director Bill Tripp from the Crook Tribe. Hi, Director Tripp. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, so exciting announcement. We have this new landmark agreement between CNRA and the Crook Tribe. So thank you. It's been such a pleasure working with you and your team and thinking through how do we put legs to this new law and how do we get more cultural fire on the landscape. So please, if you don't mind, sharing some more about the exciting news and what does Senate Bill 310 mean to the Crook Tribe?
Yeah, this is really a really exciting piece of law here in California now, and we've already managed to put it to the test and get about 30 to 50 acres of cultural burning done just in the past month in and around our tribal community, and so that's really an exciting endeavor to see kind of unfold. We've started working. We've been working with the state agencies for probably 8 to 10 years now to try to overcome some of these historical wrongs, and a couple of the things that have emerged out of those efforts, in addition to working with local and regional groups and coalitions, of people that want to help. You know, we published a couple of reports that can be referenced back on. You know, and the first one being the Good Fire report. You know, that report was published here a few years back, and it was heavily focused um, around the conversation that was going on around the governor's budget and the need to increase our efforts around fire resiliency work and policy change to make this all happen. You know, the next one that we put out there was a Good Fire report, or another one, maybe not the next one, but the Good Fire 2 report. And we did that in alignment with the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission that was you know, pulled together by Congress here to see if we can figure out ways to overcome this at a national level. So that was kind of a national piece that aligned with the conversation to kind of make sure that we could get the federal side of the conversation kind of engaged as well. You know, our territory is a little over 1 million acres in size, our Aboriginal territory, and 98% of that is national forest system. And so, you know, most of what we work to do is on those lands. And so, you know, we've done some other reports like infrastructure ignition reports and you know, climate adaptation plans and those kinds of things that all kind of get into some of the details on why we need to do some of these things and starts to get to the how. But you know, it's one of the things that is kind of been missing in the conversation about the historical timeline is, you know, on the federal side is the Weeks Act of 1911. And so that was intended to, you know, enable the sale of lands in the East to create forest reserves. But what it did is, in order to get Western governor support, it also, you know, ended up creating a means for states and federal agencies to work together in wildland fire management, which took another step towards the wholesale exclusion of fire. And so, so that timeline continued on and on for quite some time, and SB 310 is kind of that first real solid step towards us now being able to go to working together and having tribal, federal, state, local community, and even private citizen coordination in regards to some of these things, which is really exciting. You know, we've been, you know, working together to try to do things like integrate indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and those kinds of things, and blending Western science and indigenous knowledge, practice and belief systems, and you know, in a lot of ways, you know, this is all really this is gonna take all of us, but in order, but we have to be careful not to repeat those historical wrongs. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things out there. We're seeing a lot of extreme weather. We're seeing a lot of species decline. We're seeing a whole bunch of things that tend to have a feedback loop that you know, forces us into protection mode. Sometimes the act of protection can be the demise of what you're trying to protect. And sometimes we don't have the forethought to really see that until it's happening. And so it's going to be important to make sure we get this right. You know, and working with your local community, working with you know everyone that you can to improve that space to operate within is, you know, is kind of, you know, what we all seem to be working towards now, which is really great. You know, we've gone through a process here locally of identifying what our shared values are. And, cultural and community vitality is a really big part of that. Reducing fuels and ensuring community safety, having healthy river systems, on and on and on. Now we're seeing species like bumblebee in decline and getting potentially listed, and that which reinforces, has the potential to reinforce exclusion of fire in those windows of time when we should be burning in our place. Each place is going to be different. You look at California in general, it's a very big place. There's a lot of different ecotypes, a lot of different local timing that has to be sorted out with those indigenous communities and their partners. And so that's what we're hoping to do with this law is to do just that. And so it's going to take coordination with the federal government as well. Working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to talk through these issues and make sure that we don't end up with limited operating periods that, doom the bumblebee is going to be critical. We can make more flowers for them by burning at the right time. And so, and we did for thousands of years. So seeing all that start to change is just great, and not have to be bogged down with all the administrative processes. We've got the SB 310 also speaks to having agreements with local air districts. We've been fortunate enough to where our local air district on the North Coast doesn't require permits, and they we've established kind of a notification process for that, and then they process what's called a variance. So we're able to do some things that people can learn from that isn't so easy to do in a lot of places. And so it's, ultimately we do want to memorialize that into an agreement structure, and we're diving into all of the policies and all of the things that are relevant to those equations, but and building those relationships a little bit broader, so we can have those conversations and see if we can't sort out how we can effectively overcome some of the obstacles associated with that as well. But we've been lucky enough to not have to have that be a barrier immediately after signing this agreement with the CMA. And that's very much appreciated. And so, but moving forward, there's a lot of things that we could do. One of the things that that we don't ever really see clearly is we get stuck in budget cycles, and we get stuck in deficit situations. We get it's not always what a community actually needs is not always what is actually out there to support those needs. And so so we've done things like building the Ecoculture Revitalization Fund at the Humboldt Area Foundation, where they can be the financial managers, we get donations and gifts from private parties and foundations, and build that fund. We're very close to our first $1 million in that fund, and so that's very exciting. We're able to commit a permanent long-term operating capital to being able to send some people out there to do some of this burning under the cultural fire practitioner agreement here. And so that's something exciting, and it's something I'd like to see expanded throughout a lot of tribal communities, and having people establish these funds. One of the things that people also don't really realize in this equation is the UC system was established under the Morrill Act, and the Morrill Act enabled the endowments to be created for the purposes of workforce development, for developing the workforce of the future. Well, the UC system is built into the California Constitution, and not even the legislature can tell them what to do. But as communities, as agencies, as legislature, folks in the legislature, we can strongly encourage that's like, hey, this is the overall purpose of what this was. A lot of this was built on the sale of stolen indigenous lands. Why can't we put 1% towards this and actually permanentize action in local communities? 1% of that endowment fund could permanently fund 110 positions full time. And if you only have to burn 2 times a year or 3 times a year for 2 weeks, you could put a lot of people to work just with a 1-year investment. So those are the types of thinking we really have to start doing, and I think there's a lot of potential for that, and
Oh, yeah.
I need to keep that conversation going.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Director Tripp. And I know that you and the Credit Tribal Council and your colleagues at the Department of Natural Resources have been doing a lot of work in thinking through all of these different complex aspects to cultural fire and forestry management. And so thank you for your leadership and walking us through all of the different components that you're seeing and tracking and working towards. I know that we're about to transition to our next speakers, but there were 2 quick questions for you in the chat. And so Haley Brown was asking, what was the name of that organization that you mentioned that manages the fund?
It's the Humboldt Area Foundation.
Humboldt Area Foundation. Okay, thank you. And then the second one was just around attainment or non-attainment air district. And do you by chance know if Karuk Ancestral Territory is an attainment or non-attainment?
Um, I
And
don't
no worries if you
believe,
don't.
I don't believe it's in attainment. And I think a lot of that's just because it hasn't gone through the years of regulatory monitoring to be able to determine attainment status. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you again, Director. I really appreciate you walking us through kind of how the Karuk tribe is thinking through cultural fire. So again, thank you for being here. And now I'm so excited to introduce and welcome Director Joe Tyler, who is the director of CAL FIRE, to share a little bit about your insights and what you're seeing to advance cultural fire. And specifically, how is CAL FIRE thinking through cultural fire playing a role in helping meet the state's wildfire resiliency goals? And anything else you'd like to share?
Well, thank you, Geneva, for the invitation today, and congratulations, Director Tripp, on such an amazing achievement. My name is Joe Tyler. I am the director at CAL FIRE, and it's important to recognize that CAL FIRE is one of over 1,000 public safety agencies across the state. And we have the ultimate responsibility for lands that are considered to be in the state responsibility area. And as Director Tripp mentioned, the Karuk are expansive across the National Forest System lands, but it's still important, and it's critically important that we collaborate and work together as a good partner. Since the devastating fires in 2014, CAL FIRE's had to take a deep look into our world of resilience and prevention, and that is really around cultural burning, and that is around prescribed fire. I remember as a young firefighter in 1990 of doing prescribed fire and vegetation management projects on a regular basis. Still not at the pace and scale we needed to, but that work was being done. And then we found ourselves in a situation where there were some budget reductions, and the focus shifted amongst CAL FIRE, where we recognized ourselves really shifting in a focus on fire suppression, even more so than we did before. And we recognized that exclusion of fire across the landscape has created some of the forest health concerns that we have here today. We'll talk a little bit about that, though, because there's some reasons behind it. And of course, since those devastating fires about 2018, the administration since then has really been investing in resilience and prevention efforts, while at the same time recognizing that we still have to fight the devastating fires at hand until we turn the corner on this resilience need that is going to take all of us to be able to do. We find ourselves where we are trying to hit metrics and goals such as the million-acre strategy that recognizes our federal partners are going to mitigate and make more resilient at least 500,000 acres a year, and the state of California as a whole are going to account for the other 500,000 acres, with 100,000 of that specifically being CAL FIRE. But it's important that I reassure everyone that we don't just stop at 100,000 acres, we keep going. But as we recognize as this continues, that it's more than just acreage and project metrics. It is an all-in approach of multiple items in resilience and prevention. We recognize that we can't do it alone, and we recognize that we can't respond our way out of this. So that's where we look for partners, and this is a great opportunity with the Karuk tribe and others to follow, to really make our lands more resilient, to be able to reduce the risk of catastrophic fires. Some of the ways we do that are through grants such as business and workforce development, forest health research, urban and community forestry, wildfire pavilions, and equally important as it just closed, tribal wildfire resilience grants. And in our partnerships, it's important to recognize that in this agreement, the Karuk tribe will also have access to the California Prescribed Fire Claims Fund that will help in reducing concern and risk related to traditional practices and even while cultural burning prescribed fire as well. And this is really where this agreement with the Karuk tribe plays such an important role in our overall state of California resilience and prevention goals of getting good fire, or also called beneficial fire, on the landscape. For time immemorial, our Native American tribes have really been stewarding the lands, and where we find the conflict is when the urban and suburban communities approach the wildland-urban interface and have an expectation to extinguish all fires or reduce smoke impacts. Cultural burning and prescribed fire will make our lands more resilient and resistant to those devastating wildfires in controlled settings where bad fire and bad smoke would otherwise consume our communities. The administration is working to advance faster and expedited methods to get the work done through opportunities such as this agreement we're talking about today, the grant funding we talked about earlier, a recent forest management state of emergency to expedite resilience work, urban conflagration executive orders, wildfire and forest resilience key deliverables for 2025 are all things that have been occurring to really bring focus and importance on cultural burning and prescribed fire as a whole. Now, it's important in transparency to the public that we share our goals and the work that we do on the ground, not just us, but our partners as well. And people can find that. Links will be put in the chat around Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force interagency treatment trackers, the CAL FIRE fuels reduction effectiveness reporting. That is really something that as we're putting good fire on the ground, regardless of it being cultural burning or prescribed fire, we want to see that there's a positive impact ecologically to this outcome. And I truly believe it is. Again, commend the Karuk in their efforts. You know, it's important as I close here for the moment that there are a lot of links. Sometimes they're buried. And so it's important in these situations to be able to direct people to things like our CAL FIRE Tribal Affairs program, our Tribal Resilience Grants page, and our Prescribed Fire page. As I close, you know, it is a huge thanks to Chair Atterbury, the Karuk Tribal Council, Director Bill Tripp, Senator Dodd, and everyone else that has been involved in really pushing this first agreement for coordinating cultural burning forward. I look forward, and I expect our personnel to look forward to working as a great partner across California to make ourselves more resilient. Back to you, Geneva.
Geneva, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I thought I unmuted. Thank you so much, Director Tyler. Appreciate you joining us for this webinar and sharing how CAL FIRE is thinking through a lot of complexities around good fire and how CAL FIRE is really leaning in and being such a collaborative partner with tribes across the state. And I would just note that both federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes in advancing cultural fire. I know that you and your team have done so much work in hosting trainings and collaborating with tribes to get their cultural fire on the ground in a culturally appropriate manner, as well as in a safe and public benefit manner. So just a huge wado and thank you to everything that you're doing. And it's been such a pleasure working so closely with you and your team as we think through all things SB 310. So thanks for being here. And now I'm so excited to introduce to you all Deputy Secretary Sabine Tologan from the California Environmental Protection Agency, who is going to share a little bit more about what Cal EPA is thinking about in all things cultural fire and how it can help reach our climate goals. So Deputy Secretary, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking some time to share your insights on all things cultural fire and Cal EPA. And specifically, would love to just hear your insights on not only Cal EPA's climate goals, but how do you see cultural fire playing a role in meeting those goals, being that puzzle piece to all of that work?
Yes, thank you. So Cal EPA, the California Environmental Protection Agency, consists of 6 boards, departments, and offices. One of those is the California Air Resources Board, which I will probably refer to as CARB throughout this conversation. And so CARB works to reduce air pollution so that all Californians can breathe cleaner air, and also leads the nation in fighting climate change with integrated programs to cut greenhouse gases. They also fund a lot of really great, important work. And CARB's primary partners in their efforts to ensure that all Californians are breathing clean air are California's 35 local air districts, which are responsible for regional air quality planning, monitoring, and stationary source and facility permitting. In SB 310, it's enabling federally recognized California Native American tribes to enter into agreements with the local air districts with respect to cultural burning in their ancestral territories. And burns conducted under these agreements may not need to comply with certain permits, regulatory and other administrative requirements. I think we have a lot to figure out in these terms, but Cal EPA's role is to help resolve, challenges, disagreements, the things that come up between local air districts and tribes in the development and implementation of these agreements. We are working with CARB as well as the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, which is a nonprofit organization of air pollution control officers from the 35 air districts. So we're working with CARB and CAPCOA to ensure that districts are prepared to navigate this new challenge to figure out how we can all work together in a good way in support of good fire. Environmental protection is essential to make sure that we are not causing unnecessary environmental harm, but Cal EPA recognizes that there's nothing more damaging to our air and water than major fires. So our goal is not to be a roadblock to the essential work of catastrophic fire prevention, and supporting good fire is part of that. We're also well aware that decades of fire exclusion, as my colleagues have mentioned throughout this webinar, and the increasing impacts of climate change have dramatically increased wildfire size and intensity throughout the state. So as we renew urgency to reduce the risk and severity of fires, I really want to thank tribes who have maintained and revitalized their practices since time immemorial for the benefit of all Californians. I think that I forgot to, oh, Geneva introduced me, so I didn't introduce myself, but I am also California native I'm Somali Chumash. So that thanks is very personal. And I'm very grateful to be in the space that I am. Ensuring that environmental regulation is supportive of the implementation of traditional knowledge is also important to myself, to Secretary Garcia, to Cali PA, and to our boards, departments, and offices. And we know that supporting cultural burning specifically is aligned with our commitment to cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous future. But moreover, there is an inherent value in returning traditional practices to the land, returning traditional peoples to land management, and recognizing the alignment of California Native peoples' goals and our goals as a state. And a huge part of this shift is education. So I want to extend my appreciation to everybody who is a panelist and who helped organize this webinar, and to all of the folks who are here listening, taking the time to learn more and understand the history, the contemporary challenges, and value added, for lack of a better word right now, of California tribal nations in the work that we all need to do together. If you would like to get in touch with Cali PA's Tribal Affairs team to discuss this or anything else under the intersection of our purview and tribal interests, feel free to reach out to us at tribalaffairs@calipa.ca.gov. And I'm not that hard to find if you need to reach out for anything else. So I'm just keeping it short and sweet today.
There we go. Well, Wado, thank you so much, Deputy Secretary. We really appreciate you being here and your partnership in thinking through the air component of cultural fire. And we know that it's a critical component to all things good fire, and appreciate your thoughtful leadership as we navigate SB 310 and get more good fire on the ground. So just huge appreciation for you being here today, sharing some insight on Cali PA, CARV, and the local air districts. So really appreciate it. So we have about 10 minutes left of our webinar, which is a great job, panelists. Like that's awesome. Thank you all. We can take a couple more Q&As. So if you have any burning questions, please feel free to put your questions into the chat, and we can start working through those. Again, please use the Q&A feature in the bottom of the screen, and we can get into some questions. I think some first ones that a lot of questions around what are the mechanics of SB 310, and what should a tribe expect in that process, and then what also are the agreements? What are the different kind of requirements that are how are these agreements standing in place in lieu of certain requirements in the beneficial fire regime? And so I put in the chat an answer to that particular question, but I thought it could be helpful for folks to kind of wrap their head around what do these agreements mean. And so these agreements can stand in lieu of the burn permit requirements as well as the burn plan requirements. And the idea behind that is because these agreements are going to be a space where tribes and the state work out those specifics together through those agreements, respecting the tribe's sovereignty, that government to government relationship, and really kind of coordinating those aspects of cultural fire. We had a question about like timing and when do these burns apply? Is it on no burn days? How does that, integrate into the broader kind of framework or fabric of beneficial fire. And that's what these agreements are for. This is a place for two governments to sit down, work out those specifics as it relates to the cultural practice that the tribe is advancing, as well as the shared priorities and needs for not only building wildfire resiliency, but also ensuring public health and well-being. But Director Tripp, anything to add or correct in anything I shared just now?
With the mechanisms that we use, we don't really have a mechanism to like indemnify local air districts for some of their responsibilities under their charge. But what we've done is we've got to a place to where the local air district isn't saying yes or no, right? And so we've got a call from at least from the North Coast, and we've come to an understanding that they really don't want to they really don't have an enforcement mechanism against tribes really to begin with. And so it's one of those things that if it's a tribally led burn, they just said they would appreciate notification and they would appreciate sharing data. And so we've been doing that for quite a few years. And so by doing that, they're able to be aware of the burn. They're able to track, where the smoke's coming from. We share our data with them. They know how much particulates are being produced. And we're not going anywhere near an exceedance. And so that's where some of the work on the federal level is, and that state, tribal, and federal coordination kind of falls, as well as with, CARB and others, is, how do we get to the point to where we're adequately dealing with an exceptional events rule and not putting that burden on local air districts, and so there's a lot of ways that can happen. AI is a great tool. I don't know if anyone's really starting that conversation yet on how to use those tools to relieve the burden on people and organizational budgets. There's a chance, some of our practices that we're hoping to get to, burning Off-Field Mountain as our world renewal ceremonies again. That could end up being a 2,000-3,000 acre burn. Whether or not it'll actually hit a regulatory monitor enough to cause an exceedance remains to be seen, but we lean more towards protecting human health by issuing out HEPA filters. And so that seems to work fine in our community, and we've brought in semi-truck after semi-truck after semi-truck load of those. And so we are a smoke-ready community.
Well, thank you so much, Director. And the Creek Tribe has done so much thinking in this space, and just really appreciate your partnership in that public health piece too. And and like cultural fire is part of the health of our communities, of our forests, of our culture, for who we are as speaking as a Native person, but then also just as Californians. So thank you so much, Director. Really appreciate that. We got some other questions around CEQA and NEPA. And just to be very clear with folks, these burn agreements can stand in lieu of the of the burn permits and the burn plans. And then any kind of requirement or permitting requirements that the local air districts can work through and navigate closely with tribes. But as it relates to CEQA, the standard kind of CEQA universe still applies. And that said, that we are still very committed to working very closely with tribes and navigating that CEQA process and finding ways to reduce that burden where possible. And so if you're in a CEQA space and wanting to have a conversation with that, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll work very closely with you all on all things CEQA. As it relates to NEPA, that is a federal process, and so that will apply on lands that are under federal jurisdiction. And so just as a friendly reminder to folks, Senate Bill 310 is a state law and only applies to state jurisdiction. So if you are practicing cultural fire under tribal or federal jurisdiction, those federal and tribal laws will still apply. Then we also have a lot of questions here about folks asking, where do I get more information? And so thank you for being here first to get some information. And also I want to let folks know that we are recording today's webinar. It will be posted online, the Tribal Stewardship Policy Toolkit webpage. Thank you so much, Geeta, for putting that in the chat. There is the link to that website. So you can see this recording and all of the links and information that Geeta has been sharing in our chat will be posted with this recording. And so the hope is that this page will be your one-stop shop for all things SB 310. If there's anything that's missing or if you need additional clarity, please let us know. It's a new law, it's a new process, so we're bringing all that information together and warmly welcome suggestions for improvement and how we can communicate about SB 310 and work closely with, if you're representing a tribe here today, work closely with your tribe on thinking through, does this agreement work with your tribe and advance your cultural fire priorities as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Our best email address is tribalafairs@resources.ca.gov if you would like to connect with CNRA about SB 310 agreement. And doing a quick skim. Oh, and then also, how is CNRA sharing this information out with tribes? So this webinar, outreach, we've been doing presentations with tribal leaders, and we'll continue to do so as we progress. Doing another quick skim. We've got 1 minute left. So again, thank you all for being here today. I think we covered mostly everything. So again, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you spending your afternoon with us today. Thank you so much to the panelists who've joined and shared so much information with us on all things cultural fire. Just really appreciate the opportunity to work so closely with you all, and excited to see more SB 310 agreements out there in the world, see more cultural fire out there in the world. So thank you all for your partnership and your leadership in advancing this important work, not only for the benefit of your tribes and your communities, but then also to help the state of California meet its wildfire resiliency goals. So huge wado and thank you for everything that you all are doing. Thank you for being here, and we'll be in touch soon with more information. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us.